Hi, and welcome to Advocate Today. I'm Tracy Gilchrist. Thank you for joining me. This year's elections was historic in so many ways, particularly for the LGBTQ plus community. I spoke with President and CEO of GLAAD, Sarah Kate Ellis, to discuss the LGBTQ plus gains and how equality won the day. Hi, welcome, Sarah Kate Ellis, President and CEO of GLAAD. Thank you for joining us again. I very much appreciate it.
Anytime. I love being here with you, Tracy.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, you're here to talk about the midterms. They did not pan out the way the pollsters had suggested they would, or the media, most of the mainstream media. And I wonder if you would talk just kind of generally about this fact that a red wave did not materialize in the way that folks said it would.
Yeah, I think if you look at the last four elections,
Mm.
the pollsters, the pundits, and the politicians kind of been getting it wrong each time. And I think in large part because you have this younger generation who is showing up, who a large majority of them identify as LGBTQ, and they are voting in the interest of the LGBTQ community, for women's rights, for people of color, for people with disabilities, and they're taking that into consideration when they're going to the polls. And so you're seeing a different scenario play out over these past four elections than initially is usually being reported or thought to be.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that worked out really well in our favor this time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that's great. Would you share a little bit about, there were some major gains for LGBTQ plus politicians this time. Would you talk a little bit about this real hat trick of, we now have two lesbian governors, which I think is amazing.
Coast to coast. We are coast to coast.
Yes.
It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. I never in my lifetime, personally, did I ever think I would see, I mean, never. And it is, they're wonderful candidates. They are smart women who are going to lead these states to great places. And I'm so glad that they represent our community as well. I think that what we're seeing as in terms of LGBTQ candidates more and more is that we're seeing more and more people come out. We're seeing more and more LGBTQ folks running. And, I also want to point to Colorado, where an incumbent governor, gay out, Jared Poles, ran and won in a landslide. I mean, everybody's talking about DeSantis, but in Colorado, this happened, and that's a swing state. And he won, in a large majority. So I think that there's a lot of good out there that's happening, and our community is leading the way.
Yes, wonderful. And I should be sure to say that when we're talking about these lesbian governors, we're talking about Maura Healey in Massachusetts and Tina Kotek in Oregon. And so that's just wonderful news. And then in my home state of Connecticut, there was a first with Eric Russell, who's the first Black gay man to be elected statewide. And I wonder if you would comment on that win as well.
I think it's wonderful. And, I can't wait. Not that I'm impatient, but I am impatient. I think it's part of being an advocate. And wrapped up in my job, I'm impatient because I want to stop having the firsts. I want to have the thirds and the fourths.
Right.
And I think it's wonderful that we're seeing these firsts because they're breaking the glass doors, the ceilings, whatever the barriers have been systemically built into the system, they're breaking through. And I want to see more and more of those. I'm really excited about it. And go Connecticut.
Yes, absolutely. So seeing more and more of it, we have had also some trans and non-binary folks who were elected in this recent election. And they're not the first, but the more the better. So would you talk a little bit about some of those wins in places like Minnesota and Montana, which is really kind of amazing in my estimation?
And we do clutch our pearls in amazement. And then our whole lives, or my whole life, is dedicated to humanizing our community
Right.
and having other people realize we are all just people like everybody else. And we are your neighbors, your mail delivery folks, your pilots, your teachers. your family members. And I think that that's what brings me such joy across the country when you see more. Sarah McBride won again this year in Delaware, when the first trans, I believe, state senator,
Yes.
in Delaware. So now she had her, she came back again to win. So I think that we're hopefully starting to see some normalization of our community, in the sense of that we are, we can run for office too. And I think it's so amazing, especially after this last legislative session where we saw over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills put up against our community, to see our community stepping in and stepping up, to make it better the next year. Even though we are projecting that it's not going to be a good legislative session come January 2023, but we can talk about that. Let's stay in the goodness.
Okay, we'll stay positive for now. We can have you back to talk about something negative. Also, I've heard it said, someone messaged me and said, hey, you all need to cover this. Equality was on the ballot. Equality won. And that's in terms of states where people voted to protect access to abortion. And then also Nevada's question 1, which protects people, sexual orientation, gender, race, etc. So would you talk a little bit about those incredible wins as well?
Yeah, I think, one of the big motivating factors that we knew was going to be for this election cycle was bodily autonomy. And that affects all of us. That affects the LGBTQ community, that affects women, and that affects people who care deeply about women as well. And so I think that we also did see a measure around gender identity and sexual orientation, but where we saw the measures for bodily autonomy and abortion, we really saw voters show up, even in Kentucky, right, where they thought they had the opportunity to take bodily autonomy away from women. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And what we can learn from this, and what I hope everybody learns from this, is that when you take rights away from people in this country, we will show up, and there will be a response at the ballots. And so it's a really important lesson that I hope those, especially in the wake of Dobbs and Roe v. Wade, take into consideration as we move forward. Because you know what? Marriage equality is on the line. Lawrence versus Texas is on the line. And just for people who don't know what Lawrence versus Texas is, it's a 2003 decision by the Supreme Court for intimate relationships, for LGBTQ intimate relationships, that decriminalized being together. So if that is revisited, which the Supreme Court has said that they do want to revisit. Clarence Thomas mentioned it in the Roe v. Wade decision, or in the Dobbs decision, excuse me. That can criminalize us as a community again. And I know, because of the work that I do at GLAAD, that we created commercials to go out and digitally and on broadcast to inform and educate our community that these things, that equality was on the line this year, that this midterm election was about equality too, even though it might not be the most talked about issue going in.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And then I wonder if you could just kind of end with some general thoughts about what you think this means moving forward, how we need to coalesce as communities, etc.
So, the LGBTQ community, in the last presidential election, there are several articles that were written about us that said that we helped really move the vote for pro-equality candidates up and down the ballot. By 2030, 1 out of every 7 voters will be LGBTQ. So we have a tremendous amount of power and voice at the polls. And I'm so excited that our community is using that power and that voice. We always say, We do a tremendous amount of work to make sure that our community is registered and has a plan to get to the polls. And last at the presidential election, 93% of LGBTQ people who were registered voted. That's outstanding.
Yeah.
We're about to go back into the field now. We do it after each election to find out where we were in this election. We worked really hard at GLAAD and with other organizations to get us all registered, especially our younger ones who are just turning 18 for this election, and to get them to the polls. So I think I want to close by saying the future is bright.
Mhm.
And for the LGBTQ community who thinks and approaches the world intersectionally, it lies with them. And I think we're here to be great partners and help lead them.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah Kate Ellis. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for all the work you do over at GLAAD. It's just so important.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you again to Sarah Kate Ellis for sharing her insight. We look forward to catching up with her again when the new session begins. The 2022 Out 100 list is here, featuring the year's most impactful LGBTQ+ changemakers in entertainment, fashion, politics, business, and beyond. See the full list of disruptors and groundbreakers on out.com. The Advocate channel is available now on all streaming platforms. You can also follow us on YouTube for more content from the Advocate channel brands. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist, and I will see you next time.